an echo. Let me just see where I can take it off from.
They're recording, right? Thanks.
I'm just going to see. Yeah, I think I've heard. I think I've got the echo out the way because we did have an echo as well. Now we've got another echo. Are you the iPad, Saul?
Yeah, well,
Okay. I'm just muting the ones that are here. Yeah, I'm muting the ones that are here. Okay, so just for those of you that are on Zoom, we are 7, 8 of us at the table, and another 4 on Zoom. Another 4 of us on Zoom. So, okay, L'chaim for Purim Katan. Tonight is called the small Purim Katan, which is a fascinating concept. So maybe let's chat about that a little bit first. Okay. Is your such Shushan Purim Katan? Was it a leap year? What happened in a leap year? Yeah. So we're dedicating our learning tonight to the neshama of Michael's father. What's Hebrew name, Michael? Dov ben Tuvia Halevi. Dov ben Tuvia Halevi, Michael's dad, whose yortzat is Shushan Purim Katan, which commences tomorrow night, 15th of Adar Rishon, 15 Adar 1, and so we already said when we learned, I think one of the Masechtas that we learned, you got it, okay.
Yeah, thank you.
One of the Masechtas that we learned discussed the way in which the Hebrew calendar synchronizes with the solar calendar, and every 19 years, which is called a machzor, we got to have a few leap years. There's about 7 leap years in a 19-year machzor. And the way that we create a leap year, once again, reminding everybody, is by adding an extra Adar. Hence this year, we have 2 Adars, Adar 1 and Adar 2, which leads to the question, which is the real Adar? We actually had this in one of the Gemoras that we learned. This, I think it was Sanhedrin. Was it in Sanhedrin? I'm trying to remember. It was one of the Gemoras we did discuss this, the concept of, did we do brachas for a while? Oh, we did brachas for a while, so it could have been in brachas. That the concept of adding an Adar. So now you've got 2 Adars, Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, Adar 1 and 2. And interestingly, it's one of the unresolved areas in halacha. What is unresolved is which is the real Adar. Is Adar 1 the real Adar and Adar 2 an addition? Or is it the other way around? Adar 2 is the real Adar. And there's sages that say, well, Adar 2 is the real Adar. How do we know? Because the real Adar is always right before Nisan and Pesach. So Adar 1 is the addition. And there's another opinion that says, no, Adar 1 is the real Adar. How do we know? Because Adar is always the 12th month of the year. So if Adar 1 is month number 12 in the calendar year, then it must be the real Adar, and Adar Beis must be the addition. In halacha, it remains an unresolved issue, a teiku, like Bein Hashmoshes, like the area between sunset and Tzeisak Chavim. We don't have a conclusion, and for that reason, we have to treat the 2 Adars in certain ways as if either of them or both of them are the correct Adar. Hence, all different minhagim develop. Generally, people commemorate yortzaits in the first Adar. Many people have a custom to commemorate both, unless it occurred in a leap year, as Michael's father did, and then you know exactly which Adar it is because it occurred in a leap year. And then, of course, the dilemma arises with regard to Purim, which we commemorate every year on the 14th of Adar, it's Purim, and the 15th of Adar is Shushan Purim. What happens if you've got a year like this one that has 2 Adars? So you've got 2 14th of Adars and 2 15th of Adars. And this is the last matter that's addressed in Shulchan Aruch. Now, just to give everyone a little background, the Shulchan Aruch has 4 parts. There are 4 components to Shulchan Aruch. And the first is called Orach Chaim, which literally means the way of life. Orach Chaim is that part of Shulchan Aruch which travels the calendar. It travels the Jewish calendar. And it tells a Jew what to do every day, every Shabbos, every Yom Tov, going through the calendar. The other parts of Shulchan Aruch in brief, you've got Yeridaya, which talks about the law, Gesund, which talks about laws like Kashrus and Shabbos. You've got Chosh and Mishpat, you can hear the word court in there, which talks about civil claims and damages. And you've got Even or Ezer, which talks about Jewish marriage law and the home and the household and our responsibility to women, our wives, Ksubas, Kedushin. So Orach Chaim is the first section, which talks about the calendar of Jewish life, the Moyadim, the festivals. And it starts off with Nisan, because of the fact that the Torah says, that we should be counting our festivals from Nisan. So it makes its way through the year from Nisan and ends up with Adar. Adar is the conclusion. So you go through the year and you go through the various Yomim Tovim, Pesach, Sfiras Omer, Shavuos, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and right at the end of the section of Orach Chaim, the section of the Shulchan Aruch called Way of Life, Orach Chaim, are the laws of Purim and Megillah. Why are Purim and Megillah last? Because Purim and Megillah are last on the calendar. If you look at a Hebrew calendar in most years, Adar is the last month, as in the way in which the months are numbered from Nisan. So Purim, which is the highlight of Adar, even though it's in the middle of Adar, Purim, which is in the highlights of Adar, which this year the primary Purim will be Adar Beis, second Adar. So that's the last set of laws in Shulchan Aruch in the section called Orach Chaim. And right at the end of this, with Megillah and Purim, the last thing altogether is the story of tonight and tomorrow, a day that is called Purim Katan, the small Purim. The day in Adar Rishon that is considered to be the date of Purim is called Purim Katan, the small Purim, and then you've got Shushan Purim Katan, small Shushan Purim, and those two are commemorated. How are they commemorated? Predominantly in a very basic way, that we don't say Tachanun in our davening. That already began at Mincha this evening, the night before. We don't say Tachanun, our prayer of supplications for these 2 days. And we also are not allowed to fast. You know, if you declare a personal fast for any kind of reason, you can't fast, and we don't make a hesed. If God forbid we have to do a funeral or we have to mourn, we don't eulogize, ein maspidin. And that's the very last thing that is discussed in the Shulchan Aruch. Now I want to read it inside because it's quite fascinating. What it says here is, first of all, the subject matter, Simon Tov Reish Tzadik Zayin, the subject matter of the very last Simon in Shulchan Aruch, ein oimrim tchina barba asar v'chamish asar sheva adar rishon v'din tainis v'hesped bahen. Shulchan Aruch says the fact that we don't say techina, we don't say tachanun on the 14th and 15th of the first Adar, as well as the law of not doing fasts or eulogies on these days. Ubay seif echad, it has one seif, and this is the final seif in Shulchan Aruch. And I want to read it because it's quite fascinating the way the Ramah comments at the end of this seif. The Ramah was the primary commentator in Shulchan Aruch, the primary authority, especially for the Ashkenazi world. And this is what happens here. The Shulchan Aruch says, Yomar ba'asar v'chamisha asar sheva adar rishon, the 14th and 15th day of the first Adar, because they are, so to speak, quasi-Purim. If the matter of Adar is unresolved, and our sages took a decision that Purim is commemorated with its mitzvahs, Mishloach Manos, Matanos Levyonim, reading the Megillah in the second Adar, but this could be as important. And therefore, Ein Noiflin al Pnayim, no falling on your faces. In other words, no tachanun. Ve'in oimrim mizmor yancha Hashem b'yom tzara. We don't say the passage of Yancha. That is the Psalm 20. Tehillim Chof. No, not for 2 days. V'asurim behesped, and we don't eulogize the tainis, and we don't have any fasts. Avol sha'ar devarim einoagin bahem. But all the other matters to do with Purim are not customary in the first Adar. In other words, we don't have a din to read Megillah or to give Mishloach Manot or tzedakah in the way of Matanis Levyonim. He brings down, there is an opinion that you can eulogize or have a fast. And here comes the Ramah, the Haminag Kisvara Rishayna, the Minag, the custom is like the first opinion that we don't do tachanun on these days. Then the Ramah says, Yesh Oimrim, there's a view, Shechayev laharbos mishte v'simcha, that you got to have feasts and joy on these days. There's a view that you are mechuyev, you literally are obligated to have a Purim Suda tonight and tomorrow. So, the Arba also Sheva Adar Rishon on the 14th of Adar Rishon. But then he says, V'ei noeg in kain, that's not the prevailing view. Mikol Makaim, and here comes the crunch, because this is what we should be doing. Mikol Makaim, nevertheless, and we've got to bear in mind, these are the final words of the whole section of Orach Chaim. Mikol Makaim, nevertheless, Yarbek Tzaspe Seuda, one should add a little bit in feasting, in order to fulfill our duty in accordance with the machmirim, with the people who say that we should be stringent about celebrating the first Purim Kotzen and Shushan Purim Kotzen. And then the Ramah adds a pasuk which comes from Mishlei, with Toiv Leiv Mishte Tomid. Those of good heart are always partying. Mishlei Tesvav. That's how Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim ends. Now it's a very interesting comment that, it's almost like when somebody says, when people are looking for an excuse for a party, and we're saying it for this reason, let's have a party. For that reason, let's have a party. And somebody says, I'm sure it happened to us all, especially when we're young, you know what? You don't need to have an excuse for a party. Taiv Leiv Mishta Tamid. People are going to be happy. One of the things we learned in these awful years of isolation is how difficult and challenging it is if we can't have human contact, if we can't be together and make a l'chaim. So it's interesting that this verse, which comes from Mishlei, is the final verse that the Ramah pastes right at the end of the entire section of Orach Chaim. Words which literally mean it's good to party. Now, it's very similar. Right at the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, there's a phrase that reads, you often see it on the curtain of the ark in many shuls. You know that pasuk that's on the curtain of the pareches, on the curtain in front of a shul. I place God before me always. In other words, Shulchan Aruch begins by saying that in order for a Jew to do what we have to follow all the rules, we've got to imagine, we've got to be filled with a certain sense of awe. Hashem bira'ada. It says that one should fear God, one should have awe for Hashem. So we've got to be imbued with a sense of awe when we contemplate that this is the King of Kings, Hashem above, who's given us his mitzvahs to do. It fills us with a certain sense of respect and awe, and that prepares us to go into Shulchan Aruch, to do what we have to do. Because before doing what we have to do, we know what Hashem is all about. And at the end of the section is this one about Simcha, Tov Leiv Mishte Tomid, that there's always got to be a sense of joy, that it's a key issue, that it's a mitzvah. And by the way, that's a huge theme of what Adar is about, that joy, Simcha, is a key component in serving Hashem. Doing our mitzvahs, doing everything that we do must be filled with a sense of joy. Now we know that the word tamid, which is continual, also relates to the two korbanot. There were two sacrifices in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the temple, which were known of as korban tamid, the daily or continual offering. We read it in our davening every day. The one lamb was offered in the morning, and the second one was in the evening, almost a copy paste in terms of its formula. And these were called the tamid, the always korban. Why? Because there was a Shabbos one, but the Shabbos one was only offered on Shabbos. And there was a Yontif one, which was specific to that particular Yontif, a Pesach offering, a Shavuos offering. There were offerings that people brought for different reasons, but the Tamid was an offering that came every morning and every evening. It basically was the brackets which so-called framed absolutely everything that we do. And that morning Tamid and that evening Tamid are the beginning and end of the section called Orach Chaim. Now, the fascinating thing is what symbolizes this more than anything else is the story of Purim Katan, the small Purim, which is the day that we celebrate and mark tonight and tomorrow. That is a very obscure kind of day because it doesn't have all of these, how would you call it, these mitzvahs. I mean, there's a statement of Chazal that there's no difference between the first Adar and the second, except for reading of the Megillah and Mishloach Manot and Matanas Lev Yonim, the mitzvahs of Purim. And no Ta'anit Esther. We don't have to fast today. Now, the story of Purim, why is Purim at the end of Orach Chaim in general? Because our sages say that Purim and Adar is the zone in the year that gives the life force of simcha, of joy, to the entire year. In other words, we draw from the well of Adar and Purim, and that is supposed to fuel all of our Ivduas Hashem b'simcha, of serving Hashem with joy, that takes place throughout the entire year. Different Yomim Tovim, different things that happen have an effect not only on that time, but on everything. So now we're getting there. So now what happened? How did Simchas Torah lose its place to Purim? Ephraim just mentioned. If you look at the different Yomim Tovim of the year, the time of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah, when we daven, we say a phrase, Zman Simchaseinu. This is the time of our joy. And in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, we had that pattern, certainly during the month of Tishrei, the festive month of Tishrei, that we would draw from different big days, because Tishrei had all the heavyweight days. So we would draw from those big days, so to speak, a feeling, a vibe for the whole year. From Rosh Hashanah, we would be so-called impressioned with the royalty, the majesty of Hashem as a king. And even though that's emphasized on the day of Rosh Hashanah, that mood or that vibe would permeate the entire year. Our respect for Hashem as a king. Our concept of Teshuvah is not only a Yom Kippur thing, but Yom Kippur would give the impetus for the entire year. And as Ephraim was saying a moment ago, Simchas Torah and Sukkot, Simchas Torah, which was Man Simchaseinu, was that section in time which fueled the joy of the year. Our sages said that the Yidden would come up to Yerushalayim, it would be Oile Regel, and they would witness the incredible joy in the temple, the Simchas Beis HaSha'eva, the celebration of the water pouring, and all the happy things that happened, and the conclusion of the reading of the Torah, and in modern day we'd say the Hakafos, and all of that joy of, in today's day and age, we could say the 9 days of Sukkot, Shmini Atzeres, and Simchas Torah, would then be planted throughout the year. But what happened was, when there was no more Beis HaMikdash, the power of the joy of Sukkot was diminished. Not, God forbid, that it's not there, but it didn't have the same capacity that it had in the time of the temple, in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, Hashem came along and replaced it with Purim and Adar. Adar and Purim, in a world, in a state of galus, in a state of exile, replace the power that Yom Tov, Sukkot, and Simchas Torah had in the Beis Hamikdash. And why so? What's the advantage that Purim and the days of Adar have over the joyous days? The theme is the same. It's a theme of serving Hashem with joy. And by the way, joy is a very important thing because that's what makes our service of Hashem strong and sustainable. Because when we serve Hashem with joy, with passion and enthusiasm, that's going to fuel more mitzvahs. If the mitzvahs are going to happen in a morose kind of way, like if a person feels obligated and heavy, like, oh my, I've got to do this and that. If there's a heaviness in our step, then it's not going to happen. When do people do things sustainably? When we're happy and enthusiastic and passionate. That is what causes our mitzvahs to have so-called a skip in the step. There's a bit of a dance to it. But in Galus, in a time of exile, Adar and Purim have an advantage over Sukkot and Simchas Torah. The advantage is that they're far more so-called up to date with the kind of lives we live and the kind of days that we commemorate. In those days, where a lot of our days were so-called surrounded by the aura of the temple, the aura of the Beis Hamikdash. So the influence could be felt through the year, but our lives became, in Golus, have become far more ordinary. The downside of, obviously, we bemoan the fact that we don't have the Beit HaMikdash and the spectacular service and all of the rituals that took place there. But our lives became more ordinary. We live very much more like the rest of the world lives. It's true, we still have a Jewish lifestyle, and thank God we have Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, and we have all of the different things that we do, but it's not as, we call it begaloy, it's not as revealed and obvious as it was in the time of the temple, when you could feel that in the electric of the air and in everything.
It's more, if I may
Yeah.
say, it's more physical. Pouring the Sudas.
Yep. I'm gonna repeat what you're saying, because on the Zoom the guys have said they don't always hear it. Ephraim is saying that Purim is more physical. There's a Suda. There is we're more engaging with the world as yeah. And Simchas Torah is more spiritual. But there's another part that I want to add, and that is that Purim and the days of Adar are not necessarily filled with the same holiness of the days of Sukkot and Simchas Torah. They're ordinary days. Even Purim itself, which is such a powerful day, is not a day of Isser Malacha. There's no prohibition to do work on Purim. Yes, it says in Shulchan Aruch that one should try not to work on Purim, and that it won't be a Siman Bracha. There won't be a sign of blessing. A person should try and take the day off and focus, if possible, completely on the mitzvahs of Purim. But in terms of law, a person can work on Purim from morning to night. If you get the Megillah, if you hear the Megillah being read and you cover yourself for the mitzvahs of Purim, there's no prohibition in going to work. There's no prohibition in riding in a car. There's no prohibition in almost any malacha. That means that Purim is an ordinary day, and so are all the other compatible days in Adar. But Purim therefore symbolizes the extraordinary within the ordinary, which is part of the great understanding of Hashem's intent in creation. Hashem didn't want a world that's only about other world godliness. He wanted a world where the godliness, the extraordinary, comes into the ordinary. And the type of days that Purim and Shushan Purim are, and not just those days, but all the days of Adar, because we say Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha, all the days of Adar are influenced and symbolic of the Simcha of Purim. Purim is the, how would you call it, the culmination of it. However, all the days of Adar, and in a year like this, we've got double, because we've got 60. It's not just 30. We've got a double helping, a double portion of Adar days, and all those days are filled with Simcha. But those are supposedly, except for the Shabbosim, they're ordinary weekdays. They're chol. And yet they have a special sense of Simcha. And those days, we'll get there, we'll chat in a moment. Those days are therefore much more powerful in terms of influencing the whole year with the situation of Simcha. Now, Purim Katan, the smaller Purim, because of the fact that it's even more ordinary than Purim. It doesn't have as many mitzvahs as Purim has. It just so happens to lose out because our sages have said we can only commemorate the reading of the Megillah once, and therefore it's going to happen in Adar Sheni. But it doesn't mean that Purim Katan has no power. It's also a day of great joy, and it also symbolizes and carries the heavyweight power, the bracha, the blessing of the real Purim, the big Purim. And therefore it's even more ordinary. And because it's more ordinary, it's more extraordinary. And that answers a very simple question. Because you can ask a question, why would Shulchan Aruch end off with this particular subject? Because after all, the order of the Yom Tovim in Orach Chaim, as we said, follows the calendar, as we said, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. Now, if you come to a leap year, Purim Katan is not at the end of the Adar period. Adar is 2 months, Adar 1 and Adar 2, and Purim Katan is halfway through the first Adar. So theoretically, Purim Katan should have arrived as we started talking about Purim. In the very beginning, when Shulchan Aruch first started addressing the subject of Purim, it should have already said that if you're in a year that has 2 Adars, you're going to come to a special day called Purim Katan before you even get to Purim, before you even come to all the other mitzvahs. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't do that. It goes the other way around. It talks about Purim proper, Purim regular, you could say, and only once all of the laws to do with Purim are completed, then suddenly right at the end, the story of Purim Katan is mentioned in the final line, in the siyum of Orach Chaim. And what's the reason for that? The reason is because of the importance that that Purim Katan has in our lives, because it tells us that joy of service of Hashem must be tamid, must be continual. It mustn't only be on Purim. It mustn't only be on Purim Katan. Every day, 365 days, a solar year, 12 months or 13 months in a Hebrew calendar leap year, the mitzvah of simcha, of serving Hashem with joy, is there, and therefore we have to make sure to increase in our suda, increase in our partying l'chaim. So that was the story of Purim Katan for a year in which it's to be found.
The question about the story of Purim originally didn't go 1 year, a few years, 2 years, 3 years.
It stretched over a few years, yeah.
So once within the 3 years, surely you had 1 leap year. The question is that all days.
Maybe they didn't, because there would have there for sure been a leap year.
No,
Not every 4 years.
No.
Not every 3 years.
In 19 years, you got 7.
7 leap years.
Right. So if you divide 19 to 7, so the question is, if one, further of all, the leap year was at the old days, it was before the date of set calendar. So the date, the leap year would be announced by the Sanhedrin.
Yeah, that's right. So I think they weren't making those last minute decisions anymore. I think that only in Yerushalayim. I don't think they were declaring leap years in Persia. But the Megillah doesn't talk about a leap year.
No, but maybe when it happened, the original story, the Megillah, it was a leap year. We don't know if
I think we would be told
a leap year or it was in.
I'm going to guess it was a regular year, but we'll have to look it up. I'm going to guess it was a regular Adar, because the Megillah doesn't mention. The Megillah could have said that it was in Chodesh Adar Aleph or Adar Beis. But interestingly, what you said before, that in those days, they used to, in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they could announce the leap year at the last minute. And if you remember, there was a lovely idea that there were 2 leaders in Am Yisrael, in the Jewish people, who were not allowed to be part of that decision about making a leap year. One was the Kohen Gadol, and the other was the king. They weren't allowed to be part of the bench that sat to decide on making a leap year. You know why? It was a conflict of interests. The king used to pay his army on an annual basis, the Melech. He paid his soldiers an annual salary per year. So if he got an extra month, he had his soldiers for a whole month, salary free. It was quite a bonanza. So the king loved leap years because he could run the army for a whole month on the house without pay. So the king was pro leap years. He was pro a second Adar. The Kohen Gadol, the Gemora says, had the opposite bias. The Kohen Gadol's problem was that when he went in to do the temple service on Yom Kippur, that special service, he was barefoot on a cold stone, and sometimes it could be freezing. It was very difficult if it was cold. Now, if you add an extra Adar in the northern hemisphere, you're going to push not just Pesach, but all the Yom Tovim a month deeper into winter. In other words, what the effect of adding 30 days to a year, and don't forget it wasn't with a calendar, it was last minute, was you were pushing, in terms of the solar year or the seasons, you were pushing Yom Kippur 30 days deeper into the coldness of winter. So the Kohen Gadol didn't want a frozen Yom Kippur. He didn't want to be the, what's that word, the frozen chosen. What are the Jews in Alaska called? The frozen chosen. Yeah. No, so jokes aside, so the Gemora says that the Kohen Gadol and the king, yeah, but in a particular year, right, it evens it out over the general 19-year span. But the way the human bias works is we always want to sort things out for now. So like, for instance, if you're a farmer and you want a rain season like now, you're going to daven for rain now. You're not interested in overall averages. So that what our sages explained was that the Kohen Gadol had a bias against making a leap year. The Melech had a bias to making a leap year. So therefore, neither of them were allowed to sit on the bench on the Sanhedrin when it decided whether or not to make a leap year. However, if they both sat there, their biases were considered to balance out, and then they were allowed to be there. Either both or none, exactly.
Purim and I think Hanukkah will be the only two holidays that are going to be there.
Yeah.
In time to come.
Yes. Because they represent the miracle of the ordinary, within the ordinary, which is the ultimate purpose of creation. In case anybody didn't hear, I'm not sure how powerful the mic is. Saul is pointing out there's a famous chazal that many Yom Tovim won't exist after in the future time. They won't be relevant anymore. But Purim and Chanukah for sure will remain even after Mashiach comes, according to all dayas, according to all opinions.
Service is excellent. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stop the recording now.